The life of a believer is not a stagnant pond, it is a river that must navigate through stones, bends, and sudden drops. Prophet Muhammad taught us that the parable of a believer is like that of a fresh, moist plant. The wind tilts it this way and that, and so he continues to be subject to affliction. Meet Ahmed. Ahmed was a man of simple means, an upright and truthful soul who traded in carpets to support his family. He lived a life of moderate rank, picking his stocks carefully based on his capability, never reaching beyond what was lawful. His life was defined by a rhythmic peace, a rhythm of work, prayer, and gratitude. He believed his feet were on solid ground. But the ground we stand on in this world is never truly stable. Hardship often arrives like a thief in the night, sudden and unannounced. In a matter of weeks, the tapestry of Ahmed's life began to unravel. Prosperity, once a constant companion, began to decline. A shipment lost at sea, a business partner's betrayal, and suddenly, he found himself lost in a labyrinth of debt. He became indebted to an extent he could never repay, not even owning a single coin to clear the mounting pressure. This is the worldly fluctuation, the shift from wealth to poverty that tests the very core of a man's identity. He stopped leaving his house for months, only emerging in disguise at night to avoid the eyes of those he owed. His dignity, once his most prized possession, was being stripped away, layer by layer. Then came the moment of collapse. Not a loud, crashing break, but a quiet, hollow shattering. He stood in his living room, looking at the bare shelves where his family's belongings once sat, sold, cup by cup and saucer by saucer, just to buy bread. He felt the weight of a soul burdened to its capacity. He sat down in the darkness of his room, much like the traveler sitting in a silent, dark orchard, and he began to weep uncontrollably. In this lowest moment, the questions arrived. Why is this happening? Did I do something wrong? Is this a punishment? It is easy to view hardship as a sign of Allah's anger, a divine fury meant to destroy us. But the Quran describes the life of Prophet Yusuf, as the best of stories, and yet that story is a catalogue of trials, betrayal by brothers, being thrown into a well, sold into slavery, and unjustly imprisoned. Yusuf was never beyond Allah's care, even at his lowest point. Ahmed, in his silence, was beginning to face the ultimate test of faith, to believe that Allah is still present even when the relief is delayed. Why does Allah test those He loves? We are told that whenever Allah wills good for a person, He subjects them to adversity. These trials are not meant to break the believer, but to cleanse the soul, erase sins, and elevate one's spiritual rank. One is afflicted in accordance with the firmness of his faith. If the faith is firm, the affliction is hard. This is the early purification, the fire that turns coal into a diamond. We often confuse loss with punishment, but sometimes what looks like a loss is actually a removal for protection. Think of the ship that Al-Qaeda damaged while Prophet Musa, watched in horror. To the owners of the boat, it was a catastrophe, a hole in their livelihood. But the damage was a mercy, it saved the ship from a tyrant king who was seizing every perfect vessel. Allah may take something away from you today to save you from a greater danger tomorrow. He may remove a person or an opportunity from your life because He knows its end, and you do not. Ahmed raises his hands in the solitude of the night, whispering into the silence. There is no sudden miracle. The debts remain. The betrayal still stings. The hunger is real. But in that silence, he is learning to turn to Allah not for the result, but for the relationship. Real trust is praying when you see no signs and hoping when you hear no reply. He says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, to Allah we belong, and to Him we shall return. The resolution is far off, and the path ahead is shrouded in mist. But the test has only just begun. Does he trust the architect, or only the building? Months have bled into years, and the initial shock of Ahmed's collapse has been replaced by a heavy, rhythmic stillness. The world outside moves with a frenetic energy, neighbors renovate their homes, children grow, and the market where he once traded is louder than ever. But inside Ahmed's house, time has frozen. The life of a believer is not a constant upward climb, it is a landscape of alternating periods of strength and weakness, wealth and poverty. Ahmed continues to pray, but the miracles he expects remain hidden behind a curtain of silence. He raises his hands every night in the third part of the night, his voice cracking as he whispers the same pleas. Yet, the bank statements still arrive in red. The job applications are met with cold rejections. Every Muslim, at some point, has whispered a heartfelt dua, only to feel that no answer comes. In the silence that follows, the whispers of the soul begin. Did Allah hear me? Did I do something wrong? Is my prayer being ignored? Ahmed looks at his prayer mat and wonders if his words are even leaving the room. But he must remember that no sincere prayer ever goes unheard, it is either granted immediately, delayed until the right time, or replaced with something better. The hardest part of the test is not the hardship itself, but the isolation of watching others thrive while you are held in place. Ahmed walks past the storefront of his former partner, the man who betrayed him, and sees him laughing, his business doubling in size. It is deeply confusing when hurt comes from familiar faces while they seemingly flourish. Ahmed feels a pang of self-doubt. He asks himself if his righteousness was the cause of his ruin. But the Quran reminds us of Prophet Yusuf, a.s., who sat in the darkness of a prison for years despite his innocence. Yusuf was never beyond Allah's care, even in his lowest moment, and his relief was intentionally delayed because Allah's timing is never late, it is purposeful. Ahmed is currently in his own prison. He is learning that silence is not absence, it is refinement. When you continue to pray despite seeing no signs and continue to hope when you hear no reply, that is when faith truly shines. The parable of the believer is like a fresh, moist plant that the wind tilts this way and that. He continues to be subject to affliction to cleanse the soul and elevate his rank. He is being asked to trust the physician, who surgically inflicts pain for the patient's best interest. There are days when the weight feels like it will crush him. Allah does not burden a soul beyond its capacity, but Ahmed is discovering that his capacity is much larger than he ever imagined. He chooses patience over complaint, not because he is numb, but because he is seeking rida, the perfect contentment with what the Beloved has decreed. Genuine contentment does not mean the pain is gone, it means the joy in submitting to Allah's will exceeds the discomfort of the trial. He stops explaining his misery to people and starts talking only to the one who holds the keys to his relief. As more time passes with no visible change, Ahmed sits on his prayer mat, exhausted but anchored. He does not know that unseen work is happening in the background of his destiny. What is delayed is not denied. Just as a seed must sit in the dark, cold earth before it can break through to the light, Ahmed is being prepared for a purpose he cannot yet see. His effort is not wasted. Every tear is recorded. Every Alhamdulillah uttered with a heavy heart is a heavy weight on the scale of his deeds. He is still waiting. The cupboards are still half empty. The future is still a blurred horizon. But in the silence of the heavens, a transformation is taking place. Ahmed is no longer praying for a change in his circumstances, he is being changed by them. He is still in the middle of the storm, and the shore is nowhere in sight. But he has stopped fighting the waves. He is learning to trust the architect even while the building is still in ruins. There is a point in the trial of every believer where the weight becomes so immense that the soul begins to believe it is being crushed rather than refined. For Ahmed, that point arrived not with the loss of his trade or the mounting debt, but with the silence that followed the final blow. Hardship is often described as a catalogue of trials, betrayal, poverty, and isolation, much like the life of Prophet Yusuf, a.s., who was thrown into a well and sold into slavery. But the lowest point of the well is not the darkness, it is the feeling of being completely forgotten. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. A creditor, fueled by a heart that had forgotten mercy, arrived at Ahmed's door. In the ensuing confrontation, a heavy kick to the door caused a tragic accident. Ahmed's 2-year-old child was injured so severely that he passed away within hours, leaving Ahmed's wife in a state of chronic illness that would last for years. Losing a child is one of the greatest calamities that can befall a human being. He stood in the cemetery, his hands empty, his heart hollowed out. To buy the bread for that night's meal, he had to sell the last of their household goods, even the cups and saucers they once used to host guests. This is the peak of the mountain of grief. It is here that the most dangerous whisper arrives: why would a merciful Lord allow this? It is deeply confusing when hurt comes from familiar faces or when the righteous suffer while the wicked seem to flourish. Ahmed looked at his prayer mat and felt a terrifying distance. He felt hidden from the care of the one he had served his entire life. Every Muslim, at some point, has felt this silence and wondered if their dua was being ignored. In the solitude of a dark night, Ahmed sat on the cold floor, his bag packed with nothing but a few necessities and the heavy weight of his failures. He began to weep, not the quiet tears of a patient man, but the uncontrollable sobbing of a soul that has reached its limit. He stopped trying to find a worldly solution. He stopped calculating how to pay the debt or how to fix his broken life. In that moment of absolute exhaustion, he let go of the steering wheel. He turned to Allah with an honesty born only from pain. He didn't ask for wealth. He didn't even ask for the pain to stop. He asked for Rida, the perfect contentment with what the Beloved has decreed. True Rida does not mean the pain is gone. It means the joy in submitting to Allah's will far exceeds the discomfort of the trial. Ahmed whispered the prayer of the Prophet, at Taif: as long as you are not displeased with me, I do not care what I face. We often believe that Allah removes things from us as a punishment, but whenever Allah wills good for a person, He subjects them to adversity to cleanse the soul and elevate their rank. When Allah wants to raise a believer to a station they could never reach through their deeds alone, He empties their hands first. He removes the boat's plank to save the ship from a tyrant king, He removes a life to replace it with something pure. Ahmed was learning that what is delayed is not denied and that Allah finds you in your lowest moments. Ahmed stands up, his eyes red but his heart anchored. There is no flash of light. The debts are still there. The house is still empty. His child is still gone. But his effort is not wasted, even when the results are invisible. He understands now that his capacity was larger than he thought because Allah does not burden a soul beyond what it can bear. He has moved from being a man who prays for a result to a man who prays for his Lord. He steps out into the night, a traveler into the unknown, carrying nothing but a heavy, quiet hope. The miracle has not arrived, but for the first time in years, Ahmed is at peace. He trusts the architect more than the building. When the soul finally surrenders, it is not an admission of defeat, but an entrance into a new kind of strength. Ahmed had reached his breaking point and, in that vacuum of loss, found the station of Rida, perfect contentment with the Beloved's decree. He no longer looked at his empty hands with despair, but with a quiet, certain expectation that what Allah places within the heart, dreams, hopes, or quiet certainty, is never accidental. He understood now that what is delayed is not denied, Allah's timing is always intentional. Divine help rarely arrives with a thunderclap, it begins as a whisper, a series of small, almost invisible shifts in the fabric of destiny. Ahmed decided to leave the sanctuary of his isolation. Carrying only a small bag with the few necessities he had left, he set out like a traveler entering an unknown orchard. He was exhausted by hunger and the long journey of his grief, yet his heart remained firm. As he walked through the literal and metaphorical darkness of his circumstances, he sat down one evening and wept, not for his losses, but out of a deep, sudden realization of his own weakness before the Almighty. It was in this moment of absolute vulnerability that a stranger appeared, an elegant figure who asked simply, "Why are you so anxious? Do not be sad, I know you." This was the first sign of relief, help from a source he could never have calculated. The stranger guided him to a path he hadn't seen, a paved road where the journey ahead suddenly became possible. Allah finds you in your lowest moments, you are never beyond His care. Ahmed found that as he moved forward, the world began to respond to his inner transformation. He encountered people who helped him without being asked, bus drivers who required no fare, strangers who offered a meal, as if they had been appointed to their tasks by a divine hand. This is the unseen work of destiny. He was learning the lesson of the damaged boat from the story of Musa and Al-Qaid, that what looks like harm in the moment may actually be a hidden protection from a greater danger. The holes in his life had saved him from a path that would have led to his spiritual ruin. But the true turning point was not material, it was the growth of his character. Even with nothing, Ahmed chose to be a source of goodness. Like Prophet Yusuf, a.s., who served others and turned hearts toward Allah even while in the confinement of a prison, Ahmed began to help those around him who were also struggling. He realized that hardship does not cancel purpose, you can still be a light wherever Allah places you. One day, while passing through a marketplace, an unexpected opportunity presented itself. A trader, sensing the integrity in Ahmed's face, asked him if he had a guarantor for a potential partnership. Ahmed looked the man in the eye and replied, "I have two, the Almighty Allah and the example of the righteous." The trader, moved by a sincerity born from years of purification, accepted. Ahmed was handed a small amount of capital, 10 coins that seemed to carry a strange fragrance of blessing, a barakah that allowed every effort to result in a profit many times over. This was not the end of his trials, but it was the turning of his destiny. Healing had begun inside his heart long before his bank account began to recover. Allah sends help quietly, shaping our character and deepening our faith to prepare us for the ease that is to come. Ahmed was no longer the man who hid in the dark, he was a man who walked in the light of trust. The debts were beginning to clear, coin by coin. The heavy mist of the past years was lifting, revealing a landscape he finally recognized. He had stopped asking, "Why?" and began saying, "Indeed, my Lord has been good to me." The miracle was unfolding, not as a sudden flash, but as a gentle, persistent dawn. The architect was rebuilding the house, and this time, the foundation was indestructible. The storm has passed. The years of silence and the seasons of heavy grief have settled into a profound, rhythmic peace. Ahmed is no longer the man hiding in the shadows of the night to avoid creditors. He is a man of moderate rank, living a simple life, picking his stocks only as his capability allows. He had returned to his family in calm, his debts cleared, his head held high, not by the weight of gold, but by the weight of a faith that has been through the furnace and emerged as pure as light. Indeed, his Lord has been good to him. Hindsight is the gift Allah gives to those who were patient in the dark. Looking back at the wreckage of his first business, Ahmed now understands why the prosperity had to decline. He remembers how, when he was first rich, he had begun to fall into sinful activities. Allah, in His infinite wisdom, removed the wealth to save the man. Like the boat of the poor sailors that Al-Qaeda damaged to save it from a tyrant king, Allah put a hole in Ahmed's life to protect him from a path that would have led to his spiritual ruin. What he once saw as a catastrophe was, in reality, a divine removal for his own protection. Then there is the empty chair at the table, the memory of the child he lost during the peak of his trials. This was the hardest chapter to read with gratitude. But Ahmed has learned from the story of Prophet Musa and Al-Qaeda that sometimes a painful loss is a hidden form of compassion. Allah may remove a soul because He knows its trajectory, and He replaces it with something that brings a different kind of purity to the parents. Ahmed finds comfort in the promise of the Prophet, that for the believer who loses a child and remains patient, Allah commands the angels to build a house of praise in paradise. His child is not lost, he is a treasure stored in a place where no creditor can ever reach. Ahmed often reflects on the 10 dinars that started his recovery, the money that carried a strange fragrance and a barakah that multiplied every effort. He realizes now that Allah never delays without wisdom, and what is delayed is never denied. He had to sit in the well of poverty and the prison of debt to learn that his only true guarantor was the Almighty. He no longer prays for the more that once led him astray. He had asked only to be moderately self-sufficient, for he has seen the evil effects of unchecked prosperity. His life is now better than he ever imagined, not because he has everything, but because he needs nothing but Allah. The moral of Ahmed's life is the moral of the best of stories: gratitude transforms trials into testimony. The fluctuating periods of wealth and poverty, health and sickness, are all instances of remembrance. The affair of the believer is truly amazing. If ease comes, he is thankful, and if hardship comes, he is patient, and both are good for him. Ahmed is proof that the architect knows how to rebuild a soul, even when the building has been leveled to the ground. He whispers a final prayer: O Allah, Al-Hamid, the most praiseworthy, we know that all praise and thanks belong to you. O Allah, reward us for our calamities and compensate us with something better. Make us among those who are well pleased with your decree and those with whom you are well pleased. Guide our hearts to see your mercy in the withholding as clearly as we see it in the giving. Ameen.